Welcome to our webinar today entitled Leading with Lived Experience, How Impacted Youth and Families Can Drive System Transformation. My name is Michael Umpierre, and I am the director of the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University. And on behalf of Cjjr and the McCourt School of Public Policy, I want to welcome all of you to today's very special event. We're truly delighted to have so many of you with us today from all over the United States and the world. The focus of today's webinar is twofold. First, it's an opportunity to present this year's Janet Reno Endowment Women's Leadership Award to an incredible leader in our field, the Executive Director of the Youth Law Center, Jennifer Rodriguez. And second, it's an opportunity to highlight and discuss the critical role that young people, families, and those with lived experience play in driving efforts to truly transform youth-serving systems so that they can better meet the needs of young people, families, and communities. In many ways, this virtual event is a celebration. It's a celebration of the country's first woman Attorney General, Janet Reno, and the legacy that she left behind. It's a celebration of an amazing and inspirational leader in Ms. Rodriguez. And it's a celebration of all the individuals around the country, like yourselves, who are working tirelessly as we speak to bring forth a new vision for serving youth and families in a way that promotes their health, happiness, and well-being. In a year that has presented so many extraordinary challenges, we relish this opportunity at Cjjr and McCourt to celebrate all of these things. Before I continue, let me address today's format and some housekeeping items. We'll start today's session with the presentation of the Janet Reno Endowment Women's Leadership Award to Jennifer Rodriguez, a presentation that will be led by the wonderful Dean of the McCourt School of Public Policy, Dr. Maria Kenshan. After the presentation of the award, we'll then hear from Ms. Rodriguez herself, who will lead a discussion with two incredible advocates in their own right, her fellow colleague at the Youth Law Center, Brandi Hudson, and another colleague at Fresh Lifelines for Youth, Nicholas Jasso. This conversation will center on how to lead with lived experience to drive system transformation. For that facilitated discussion, we will be opening the floor for written questions and observations from all of you, the participants. In order to submit your questions or thoughts, simply use the Q&A box on your screen. We will be monitoring the Q&A as we go, and we'll be reserving some time at the end of the webinar for the presenters to address your questions and comments. So please be active in that Q&A box. Finally, please note that we are recording today's session and that we will be disseminating the recording in the upcoming weeks so that others who were not able to join us today have the ability to view it. With those housekeeping items out of the way, let me say a little bit about what we do at Cjjr and our connection to Janet Reno. At Cjjr, our mission is straightforward. It is to improve the lives of children and families who touch or who are at risk of touching the justice system. In all of our work, we maintain a special focus on advancing cross-system efforts that meet the needs of youth and families holistically and in line with what the research shows is effective to achieve positive youth, family, and community outcomes. We advance our mission by operating a number of dynamic training programs or certificate programs for system leaders and partners that we host on the Georgetown campus, in the field, and now increasingly in this COVID world, online, as well as through a number of site-based practice models, programs, and initiatives, such as the Crossover Youth Practice Model and the Youth in Custody Practice Model, which have been introduced collectively in over 120 jurisdictions around the country. In essence, our goal is to build and support a field of leaders who are dedicated to improving outcomes for young people, for families and communities. As many of you know, CJJR's founder and director emeritus is Cjjr Bilchik, who is one of our country's most influential leaders in the youth serving arena. Cjjr is with us today, and I want to acknowledge him for his incredible career and his ongoing leadership at CJJR, and on a personal level, to thank him for his mentorship and his friendship. In founding the center 13 years ago, Cjjr would be the first to tell you that he was greatly influenced by one of his own personal mentors, Janet Reno. For many years early in his career, Cjjr worked closely with Miss Reno in Florida as a prosecutor, and then followed her to Washington, D.C. in 1993 when she was appointed Attorney General by President Clinton. This was a monumental appointment in that Miss Reno was the first woman Attorney General in the history of our country. In serving under Attorney General Reno as the administrator of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention in the Department of Justice, Cjjr continued to see firsthand what he saw in Florida, which is what a trailblazer Miss Reno truly was. She was a leader who impacted many aspects of national policy, but one who was especially committed to improving the lives of children and youth. She stressed the importance of working across youth-serving systems to best meet the needs of youth, as well as the need for prevention, lifting up education and mentoring and community-based services in order to keep young people and families out of the justice and child welfare systems in the first place. And she also recognized the need for engaging, empowering, and partnering with youth and families themselves, a topic, of course, that we're going to explore more fully in just a few minutes. In short, Attorney General Reno was a remarkable leader who displayed a commitment to her craft and a vision that was unmatched and truly ahead of her time. For all of these reasons, in 2016, we at CJJR, in partnership with the McCourt School of Public Policy, established the Janet Reno Endowment as a tribute to Miss Reno's incredible legacy. And as you will hear shortly, this effort includes the presentation of the annual Janet Reno Endowment Women's Leadership Award. So without further ado, I'd like to get right to it. To provide more background on the endowment and to present this year's award, it's now my privilege to pass the baton to the Dean of the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University, Dr. Maria Canchan. Maria, we're so honored that you're with us today. I want all of our viewers to know just how appreciative we are at CJJR for your leadership and your support, and for the opportunity to serve as one of the research centers within McCourt in our collective effort to advance data-driven public policy for the common good. Given your remarkable career in academia, in government, in the advocacy and foundation world, I know that issues of youth and family well-being are near and dear to your heart. And for that reason, it makes it all the more special that you're with us today to present this year's award. With that, I'll turn the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that wonderful introduction. And thanks especially for your leadership and for Cjjr's leadership. CJJR is really a crown in the jewel. It is a central piece of the McCourt School and our commitment to doing work that really makes a difference in the lives of communities that we hope to serve. So thank you so much for being here. This is one of my favorite events of the year. It is a great pleasure to be here on behalf of the McCourt School and CJJR to present this important award to Jennifer Rodriguez. The McCourt School, I think, is really an embodiment of Georgetown University's dedication to being an institution that promotes the common good with a commitment to social justice, to scholarship, and to service. And this type of gathering, whether it's in person or virtual, contributes to the mission of the McCourt School, of Georgetown, of CJJR, but more broadly to all of our missions to try to use the resources at our disposal to make a difference, especially for vulnerable families and children and youth. I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the endowment and the leadership award before we get on to the fun part of the presentation and hearing from Jennifer. The Janet Reno Women's Leadership Award was established in 2016 to honor and promote the legacy of America's first woman attorney general, a public servant who had an extraordinary impact for the public good. It was developed by Georgetown University and housed at the McCourt School of Public Policy's Center for Juvenile Justice Reform with the support of Attorney General Reno's family and close friends and colleagues. Guided by a national advisory committee, including former Governor and Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano, former Attorney General Eric Holder, former Assistant Attorney General Lois Schaefer, and former Governor Deval Patrick, as well as a number of others who worked closely with Janet Reno and juvenile justice and related issues. I also would like to recognize the Cjjr Women's Leadership Awards Subcommittee, who took the primary role in identifying and recommending this year's recipient. I know from the process that there are always a wonderful number of people who are good candidates, and it is an extraordinary honor, and I know a considerable amount of time and effort was spent in this process. The endowment has a number of key programs and activities. The Women's Leadership Award and this annual conversation and opportunity recognizes extraordinary women leaders who champion the children, youth, and families and related causes to which Janet Reno dedicated her career. Jennifer will join a network of distinguished leaders to receive the Janet Reno Endowment Women's Leadership Award, namely Marian Wright Edelman, founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund, the Honorable Cindy Lederman, Circuit Judge of the 11th Judicial Circuit Court of Florida, Children's Division, and Fatima Gross-Graves, President and CEO of the National Women's Law Center. In addition to presenting the Women's Leadership Award, we have the Janet Reno Forums, which convenes experts, policymakers, researchers, practitioners, and advocates to discuss promising practices, new research, and policy reform proposals. And Michael will provide more information about the 2021 forum at the end of this webinar. I will just say that I find the forum to be just a wonderful example of bringing together research and practice in a way that really promotes impact, which is exactly what the McCourt School and Cjjr is about. In addition, the Janet Reno Leadership Fund provides financial support for training and technical assistance to leaders from cities, counties, states, and tribes to reform the way they serve at-risk youth and children. And in addition, financial support for future policy leaders is provided to assist McCourt School of Public Policy students to deepen their knowledge and gain meaningful work experiences related to children and youth systems reform. I know a number of our very best students have worked with Cjjr and Michael over time and have become really inspired to pursue careers in this field. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Now, this gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about Jennifer's work. Jennifer Rodriguez is the executive director of the Youth Law Center. And over her career, she has distinguished herself as an innovative and impactful leader, truly dedicated to transforming child welfare and juvenile justice systems across the country so that youth can thrive. Jennifer herself spent many years of her childhood in foster care and juvenile justice facilities and has spent most of her life advocating to ensure that justice, compassion, and opportunity is available for youth involved in these systems. Her advocacy has resulted in significant national policy, practice, and culture changes around the fundamental needs of youth and those involved in the system, all part of an integrated approach to the policy system. Her leadership at the Youth Law Center has a special focus on youth in both the child welfare and the juvenile justice system, receiving the parenting necessary to heal and thrive in conditions that meet their developmental and their emotional needs. Before coming to the Youth Law Center in 2007, Jennifer served for 8 years at the California Youth Connection, a nationally recognized foster youth advocacy organization, leading efforts resulting in major legislative and policy accomplishments for California probation and foster youth, including stronger educational rights, higher education funding, increased funding for transition services, and promotion of normalcy and permanency for teenagers. Jennifer received her GED from San Jose Job Corps, her BA from UC Davis, and her JD from the UC Davis School of Law. And she is the mother of 2 beautiful children. Now, it's my pleasure now to turn the screen over to Jennifer Rodriguez and to congratulate you for all you've accomplished and for this wonderful award.
Thank you so much, Dean Cancian. And I want to just say how honored I am to be receiving this award in the name of somebody who, when I think about Janet Reno, I think about an extraordinary woman leader who just persevered in spite of so many obstacles and stereotypes. And that is the same way that I think about our youth who lead and are resilient and go on to thrive in their own lives despite all of the challenges that they face and all of the low expectations that folks have for what they will do with their life. They literally make magic in their own lives and in the world. So I really want to tell you all how honored I am to be receiving an award in her name, and particularly from Cjjr. I will tell you the thing that I love most about Cjjr is the focus on young people who end up crossing over from foster care into the juvenile justice system. I think this is a population of youth that is often forgotten in the discussions that we have around the most vulnerable youth. And in particular, I feel like they are overlooked because their trajectory into the juvenile justice system is often one of system failure, not due to their own behavior, not due to sort of services or interventions that are available in the juvenile justice system that are not available in foster care, but it's simply a system of last resort when our other interventions have not worked for them. So I'm really grateful for the work that Cjjr does to ensure that we don't forget about this group of young people in our reform efforts and that we do better as a whole. So I really wanted to focus today on talking with you all a little bit around how important it is to have young people who have had direct lived experience and who live the consequences of the decisions that we make around practice and policy, part of the design of reform efforts. And I want to start off by saying, whenever I'm in a forum like this and I get introduced, it's a little bit unsettling because I've spent some time this morning reflecting on how extraordinary my path has been to getting here. Because the truth is that I actually never wanted to be an advocate. Now I'm a lawyer and I lead a national advocacy organization and am focusing on litigation and policy reform and system change. But to be honest with you, being an advocate was never my goal. What I always actually wanted to be was I wanted to be a mom and I wanted to raise children. That was my own definition of happiness for myself. And so it is truly extraordinary that I have landed here in this position. And I will say that the reason I have landed in this position is because a series of adults along the way, probably much like the folks who are on this call today, made an investment, not just in empowering me, but really in power for me, in teaching me how I could impact my own life, change my own circumstances, how I could change the lives and circumstances of other folks who were around me. And ironically, that I just sort of went along with the tide of the high expectations and opportunities that were presented to me and didn't think twice about whether or not being an advocate and being a lawyer was actually what I wanted to do with my life. But ironically, when I look at the life that I have today, it has allowed me to do the one thing that I really wanted to do, which was to be a good mother to my children. That was my number one goal. That was my own personal definition of happiness and success in my life. It was not going to law school. It was not getting my GED. It was not having stable housing. It was not reoffending and not ending up back in juvenile hall. I really wanted to be a good mom. And the investments that folks have made in my own development have allowed me to do that. The two children that were mentioned earlier are now teenagers. That is the highlight of my life and probably will be the thing that I am most proud of in my life. And I think that has to be the approach to working with young people and building up their power. Is not every young person is interested in leading and advocating their own. They are allowed to define their own definition of success. And it is all of our jobs as folks who work with them to seize every moment and opportunity to actually invest in their power. And I think this is a really important distinction because in both foster care and juvenile justice, when we talk about youth engagement and youth involvement, what we are often talking about is not investing in young people's power. It's actually, we are talking about empowering them, which are two entirely different things. And I had not heard as clear of a definition about the difference between the two until I had the opportunity over break to read Alicia Garza's new book, The Purpose of Power. And in there, she talks about how folks often confuse empowerment and power. That empowerment is really helping people to feel good about themselves, helping them to feel like they have a voice, helping them to feel like they are not the only ones that are affected by a situation. And power is that feeling that you can change your own life, your own circumstances, and you can change the lives of other folks and their circumstances too. And that it takes real and intentional work to move from empowering people to actually helping them have power. And that's the work that I feel that we have ahead of us in both foster care and juvenile justice, because we've been talking about youth engagement for quite some time now. I think folks understand when you are talking about system reform, it's good form to invite young people to share their experiences, to have a seat at the table. But often that participation is really couched in an empowerment form. It's to make everyone at the table feel good. It's because we believe it's the right thing to do. It is not explicitly designed to build the power of as many directly impacted young people as is humanly possible. And I say this as a really important distinction for all of us that are working on reform, because I can guarantee you without hesitation that there is absolutely no way that I would be sitting where I am today and would have had the opportunities that I've had if an investment had not been made in power for me. I'm getting this award today, which is a huge honor, but if I had gotten an award when I was 18, the award would probably have been least likely to succeed. I spent the majority of my childhood in facilities. The years that counted, I spent in group homes, through foster care, shelters, in and out of lockup as a teenager. And when I left foster care at 18, I had my I didn't even actually even have my GED. I earned my GED at Job Corps. But I had years of special education. I had been placed on psychotropic medication. I had an arrest history. I had no interest in going to school. I had no interest really in anything in the world. I was just surviving day by day. And folks who worked with me had really been unable to see behind the behaviors and the labels and everything that landed in my case file to identify any strength or anything that I had to offer to the world. And so I was very lucky along my adult trajectory to get connected with a series of adults who could see how teaching me to understand that I actually was powerful and I did have an impact was going to actually be the intervention that allowed me to be successful. And people ask me all the time, like, well, how did you make it from there to here? And I have to say that I do think that the process of becoming powerful was how I did that, and that it didn't depend on one person. It depended on a whole lot of relationships. And now, as somebody who leads advocacy work, what I can tell you definitively is that it would be absolutely impossible for me to be a responsible or effective advocate without constantly engaging with youth who are directly impacted. Our young people who are directly impacted in our work at the Youth Law Center are the ones who have identified that the most important foster care system reform focus that we can focus on is ensuring that foster care is a high quality intervention, that if children have to be removed from their family, that the one promise that we make to them is that they will be in a setting where they are loved, cared for, and parented. Every single youth that I have talked to about who has made it successfully out of the system attributes their success and pathway to love and relationship. So that's key to our advocacy, because that's not typically the discussion of foster care reform efforts. Folks are usually talking about things that sound more systemic, sound more concrete than how do we actually infuse love into a system. Talking to young people who have been involved in the juvenile justice system, they are very clear that the way that you reform that system is you end the detention of youth, period. And that's a big and ambitious goal. And it's one that can only be lifted up and held as our vision for change by folks who have lived that goal. And so in our work at the Youth Law Center, we work in partnership with organizations like the Young Women's Freedom Center, like FLY, you'll hear from Nick today, in order to accomplish that goal and talk about how do we really build the interventions that are outside of the system that can be an alternative to detention altogether, so that we can get to a world and a society where no child has to be behind bars. So to me, it's impossible for us to do the task at hand unless we are actually working regularly, consistently, and systematically with the young people and families who are most impacted and who are going to be the ones that fuel this movement and help us carry our work out. So I'm really pleased to be able to have two folks who are living those values with us today and who are doing that advocacy work to share with you how that has informed their approaches and to give you some guidance for things that you can go back to your jurisdiction and immediately implement. And we have one advocate who is a wonderful member of our Youth Law Center team who is working on the goal that I mentioned earlier around ensuring that every single child in foster care receives excellent parenting. If you were to ask me the one investment that I think we can make to prevent young people in foster care from moving into the juvenile justice system, this is it. Make sure they live in a setting where they are loved, nurtured, and cared for. And then I have another advocate who will follow and discuss the work that he is doing to really work with young people who are directly impacted to develop alternatives to incarceration. So with that, I am going to ask Brandi to introduce herself to you all and to tell you briefly a little bit about how she ended up on the trajectory that she is on to leading system change from having been somebody who was impacted by those decisions.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And hello, everyone. My name is Brandi Hudson. Like Jennifer mentioned, I work for the Youth Law Center. I'm actually a planning director for our Quality Parenting Initiative, and I'm really pleased to work with Jennifer, which I'm sure you guys can understand after hearing her speak. But I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to focus intently on excellent parenting for children. And the reason is because I grew up in foster care myself, and I did not, in the 18 years that I was in foster care, in any of the 32 placements that I experienced during that time, I can't pinpoint an opportunity where I could say, you know what, that was excellent parenting. Because I think my experience in foster care was one of being kept safe, and safety truly felt like the primary and ultimate goal. And so I didn't ever experience anyone having conversations or making decisions, for me or with me that really took into consideration what I needed to be well, to heal, and to thrive. And the answer would have been excellent parenting. The answer would have been to see delight in an adult's eyes when they looked at me, to feel like I was cherished and loved and valuable, to really understand what it meant to be enough. And so for me, my journey to QPI, to the Youth Law Center, and to being an advocate really is born of the need and the necessity to ensure that no child who enters foster care has to wonder, if anyone loves them, if they are valuable, if they will have the opportunity to, like Jennifer mentioned, define what success means for themselves. And so I am really excited to be here with you all today, really excited about the work that I get to do each and every day. And I am just fortunate to have a small hand in shaping systems and reforming systems so that they can be more relationship based and really focus on what children need, which is love. And sometimes it feels odd to say love. I told Jennifer this because she talks about love in the context of this work, and it's not something that I'd ever really thought about. But now I try to push myself to talk about love in this work, because genuinely, that is what every single child needs and deserves. That's what we want for our own children. And that has to be the standard for children who experience foster care.
Thanks, Brandi. And I feel like the world that we have created, if we've made it weird to talk about love when we talk about the care of children and youth, we're off track, right? If we've made love a strange topic around what children need. So Brandi, can you share a little bit around why you think it's critical for directly impacted youth and the families who love them most, the birth families, foster families, to be involved and leading system change in foster care?
Sure. And so I think it's important because it's the only way that we're going to reach real transformation. As someone who both experienced foster care and has worked in public child welfare and kind of worked in the advocacy arena, I've really come to believe that it's really easy to get entrenched in what we see as system priorities and what we see as the things that are most important to our work and to keeping systems running, and that, again, are primarily focused on safety. And until we hear, and only when we hear from parents and young people who are experiencing our systems, do we come to understand that we're often off track. And so if we really want to be impactful, and if we want to make a difference in a way that's going to feel different for the people experiencing our system, we have to hear from them what it is that they want and need, and be open to the idea that it will be vastly different from what we think we know. And so in my experience, every time I have gone into a situation and really listened openly to a young person and to a family, and not listening for any particular thing, but having a true and genuine conversation, I'm always amazed at how insightful they are and how off track my initial thinking was about the solution to any given problem. And so I do believe that it's not only important, but it's vital, critical, and necessary for young people and families to lead system reform if we're really interested in true transformation.
Thanks, Brandi. And I know sometimes when people think about who should be at the table, they're not often thinking about foster parents and birth parents. I think people widely accept youth. So
Right.
could you say a little bit more about why these are critical partners to listen to?
Sure. And I also want to just quickly talk about the table. And so I think for a long time, when I first started doing advocacy as a young person, I remember how excited I was to be invited to tables, right? Like, oh, they're making space for me at the table. And then I got to the point where I'm like, well, I want to build the table. I want to set the table. Like, I want to have a different experience. I want to be telling you guys who I think should be invited to the party. And I think that when we do that, what we learn is that birth parents, foster parents, and youth really are critical members of any team that you're putting together, and critical leaders in thinking about how to reform systems, because they know what we don't. And so when you think about even the construct of safety and child welfare, we're thinking about how do we keep children safe? Well, if we're expecting foster parents to do that and to love children and to, create attachment with them, then we need to hear from them what they need from us in order to make that happen, right? And so if we're the system and we're ultimately responsible, we need to know, well, what can we do? What barriers can we remove? What processes can we put in place that will make the road and the path smoother for you? As birth parents, if you want to reunify with your child, if you, want to learn positive parenting techniques, like, we need to hear from you. Well, what's missing? What works? Like, what aren't we talking about? What don't you know about our system? What do you need to know about our system in order to understand, the expectations that we have? So I can't even understand or conceptualize a strategy that would be effective for system reform that did not rely on those voices to set the stage for whatever strategy we're going to pick. So I think that birth parents and foster parents particularly are important because children, while they are the focus of our system, they cannot love and parent themselves. They cannot help, themselves thrive in the same way. So we really need to make sure that we're listening to the voices of parents so that we can provide them with the support that they need to do the job none of us can do, which is love and parent and protect children.
I think that's right. That if our families are actually the intervention, that really the only intervention that we have that we know is effective to true transformation for children and youth, we can't ever have a discussion about how to make that happen so that children can be in families, whether they're moving from group homes to families or from detention back to their own families without engaging the families to ask them what they need. So can you give a couple examples of work that you're involved in that is being led by the vision of directly impacted youth and families?
Well, it must be my lucky day because I happen to work for QPI. So all of the work that we do at the Quality Parenting Initiative is led by the voices and experiences and needs of children and families and foster parents. And so I think in thinking about a concrete example that I could share with you all, it's one that I will say this, I'm new to QPI. So I just started working for the Youth Law Center in April, which is very exciting. So I can't even take credit for a lot of the really wonderful things that the initiative has done and created and the real system change that they are effectuating throughout the country. But I heard one of my colleagues talk about the process to getting to one of the strategies and practices that QPI sites have used across the country, which is around comfort calls, right? And so hearing this colleague talk about the process, it was, oh, I went into a room, and I really wanted to hear from parents and I wanted to hear from foster parents and I wanted to hear from young people about what needed to change in the system, about how we could, create a pathway for excellent parenting. And I was hearing from birth parents, oh, it's really difficult, when I'm forcibly separated from my child and I have no idea where they're going and it's really stressful and I can't sleep and it's the worst experience. And then you hear from young people who are saying, I got to my new foster home, but I didn't even want to talk to the foster parent because all I could think about is the last time I saw my mom and dad, they were so upset and they were crying and everyone was really angry. And like, I don't know if they're okay. And so I can't be okay and I can't sleep at night. And then you hear from the foster parent and they're saying, I had the toughest time, really comforting the child on the first day that they were in my home because they were so worried and they were up all night sick thinking about their parents. And so hearing this same problem from multiple perspectives, and then each person saying, it would be so great if we could just have a phone call, if we could just know that our kid was okay, if we could talk to the person who was taking care of them, if from the child's perspective, could I just hear, that my mom is okay? Can I know that you've talked to my dad and like, he knows where I am and he knows that I'm okay? And yes, like the answer is yes, right? So that is an opportunity for the system to say, we hear your problem, we hear your solution. Now, how do we get behind you to make that a reality and to change our practice in a way that significantly benefits future young people, foster parents, and birth parents who are a part of our system? And that's happened. It's happened in a number of sites across the country. It's actually become legislation in 2 different states. And it all started with really listening not only for the problem, but for the solution and leading with what you hear from those who are most impacted.
It's such a good example because I think when you listen to youth about what one of the most traumatic pieces of their foster care experience is, they will inevitably say it was the removal and the placement in an unfamiliar home. And here's this solution that's so simple, coming from young people and coming from families. Just the minute you bring the young person to the home of the family, you stand in the living room and you make a phone call and introduce the parents, help the birth parent share what's going to be helpful and effective in getting that youth through the night successfully. Do they sleep with the light on? Do they sleep with the light off? What's their favorite food to eat? Are they called, do they speak another language? Are they called something else? Those are the simplest things, but they're the most important things. And they're things that only really parents know about their children. And they're the kind of comfort that only parents can really provide too. So it's a fantastic example. Brandi, before we leave, I just wanted to highlight, because I shouldn't be watching the chat, but I am watching the chat. And Dan in the chat just asked the most important question, which is he would like you to discuss the contrast between the absolute importance for youth, foster and otherwise, to receive love, and the fact that professionals like group home staff are told and warned that any expression of love from someone in their job is unethical. Dan, I'm sorry, that question is too good to wait till later to ask.
That is so important, I think, to talk about. And I think that's an example of a system barrier to what children need, that systems think is actually keeping children safe, but is in fact killing children slowly, right? And so as a system, we think, oh, we're doing the right thing because we're telling people what we believe is ethical and safe, and we're having clear boundaries, and we don't have to worry about children getting too attached. First of all, can we all know that no child can be too attached to a loving adult? That's not a thing. It doesn't exist, right? Every child has to be attached to a loving adult in order to develop and thrive. So let's just throw that out the window. But I also think that it's important to understand that every single child in our community, the expectation is that if you're in school, your teacher loves and cares about you and wants the best for you. If you go to the grocery store, the person who's in the checkout stand will say, oh, your son is so adorable. Tell me how's school going, right? Like, these are the experiences that children need in order to thrive, to flourish, to feel like they're seen, they're heard, they're valued. Why do we purposely take those opportunities away from children who have experienced trauma in our system? Like, it makes no sense. And so I think for me, systems work against their own interest and against the interest of children and families, unintentionally, sometimes intentionally. But that's a great, I think, example of what we need to stop doing immediately, right? Like, if it's one thing we can stop doing immediately, it's like, stop pretending that any child can ever receive too much love. It's not a real thing. So that, I guess, would be my response, is that it really is important for systems to think about why they're having these policies, having this guidance, and really center children, and ask yourself, is this going to get us closer to children, feeling loved, to children feeling valued and reaching their full potential? Or is it going to get us farther away? And then, like, you have to make decisions from there. But if you never ask that question, if you never really center children, and you're centering liability, or you're centering risk aversion, or you're centering what you perceive as psychological safety, then you're never going to truly do what's best for kids.
Absolutely. And I think if we have children in a setting where it's impossible for them to receive love because of boundaries, and so whether that's a group home or it's detention, then our urgent job becomes to get them out, and to get them into a place where they can be parented and they can receive love, because that is it's the only thing science tells us is actually really a truly effective, long-term sustainable intervention, is those nurturing relationships with adults. So Brandi, before I move over to Nick, any concrete advice for folks who are on here about how they can truly ensure that youth and families are leading change and are involved in change, and how to build power for them?
Sure. I think just thinking about my own experience, and that continuum from empowerment to true power. And I think that what's really important for folks who work in systems and who are working with and on behalf of young people and families, to take a step back, and before you move forward with any policy or initiative or program, or what you think is going to be the next best thing, to just simply ask people if it makes sense to them, right? Oh, you're a young person, what do you think? And so what did you need? I know it sounds very simple, but too often, from my experience, we've decided what we're going to do. And then we get to a certain point, we're like, oh, it would be so nice to have a young person or a foster parent or a birth parent react to this and let us know what they think. Instead of saying, you know what, is this even the right problem? And so I think that there are opportunities for anyone who works in youth serving programs and systems to have those conversations. And, oftentimes you can do it organically. You don't have to have a focus group or a program or, a super structured environment, but really just be intentional about the way you're having conversations and creating relationships. I think that a lot of these things really are, and Jennifer mentioned this earlier, dependent on relationship. And so if you're genuinely interested, and young people will call BS, right? So I'm thinking to back when I was a teen, I know when someone is genuinely interested in me or not. And so I think if you have a genuine interest and you're really wanting to hear from parents and young people, they will gladly have that conversation if it's genuine and if you're intentional about creating the opportunity to do so. And I think that if you want to do the big, change, because there's a difference between, oh, I'm going to talk to this young person and then I want to create a space, and I want to create, a mechanism for them to be able to really lead with the big L, then I think you need to ask yourself, well, what do I have to offer them in exchange, right? And so we can't just keep on going and extracting the best from young people and parents without thinking about what we have to offer. And so how are we supporting them? What skills are they getting? Are they able to network? Are they building out, kind of their own infrastructure so that they can be successful and have true relationships? And so I think those are the things that I would suggest is like, look for organic opportunities. And then if you want to do something big, make sure that it's not one-sided and that young person and that family is actually benefiting from the interaction and the experience as much as we know we'll benefit as a system, because we're always going to get more from young people and parents than they could ever get from us, but we can at least try to make sure that there's a little bit of balance.
That's such powerful advice. I'm thinking about it, and I think probably the most sophisticated and exciting system change ideas that I've ever heard were from some conversations with youth who were in a residential program. When I asked them, if you had a magic wand and you could redo what happened to you, what would you do? And they laid out a whole blueprint for change that was much better than I had heard at any professional table. And I really love the point around the constant conversations, because the truth is, and I think this has happened to me, Brandi, and Nick, all of us, is that we are regularly asked to come to tables to sort of represent constituencies. And it is not a small group of people who should be informing change. It is every single young person who's in the system should have the opportunity to be providing input, to be heard, to have their experience considered, because our experiences are all so different. And that's only going to happen if you do what Brandi suggests, which is have regular conversations with every young person that you meet and look at it as an opportunity for you to learn as a professional. So I love that idea of decentralizing out this idea that reform happens with sort of a small group of folks who have learned how to be at the tables that Brandi is talking about, and instead have it be like reform lives in every single adult professional who's in this system working with young people and the conversations that they're having with every youth they encounter. So thank you so much, Brandi. Nick, I would love for you to share a little bit about your incredible journey to becoming the advocate and leader that you are now and where you started.
Hi, what's up, everyone? My name's Nick, and I am the current Fresh Lifelines for Youth Youth Voice Policy Fellow. Sorry, it's a mouthful. And I'm also currently a UCLA student. I started my journey in advocacy actually through FLY, doing some public speaking stuff for them, and eventually I got really involved in the higher education from incarceration movement in college, and that's kind of what I've been on since then.
Thanks, Nick. And can you give some examples of work that advocacy system reform in juvenile justice that is being led by the vision of directly impacted youth?
Of course. So thankfully, everything I do is youth-led. In my position now as the Youth Voice Policy Fellow, the majority of what I do is asking youth directly what would best serve them. and what it would look like. So I'm very grateful in that regard. And then prior to that, my work with formerly incarcerated students in higher education, a lot of it is just the same thing. uh, Talking to folks that are going to college, talking to folks that have experienced incarceration, and asking them what they really need to be successful. Um, and I think that those conversations and the youth are the experts on their lived experience, right? You can have a PhD in whatever you'd like, right? But young people will still know more than you about their lives. Uh, and with that expertise that they bring, they'll be able to give you the best advice for developing curriculum, for how to best serve them, how to best approach them. They really are the holders of knowledge.
And how do you think that vision and the knowledge that young people who have been directly impacted, including you, is informing juvenile justice reform right now?
I think that if you think of juvenile justice and you think of reform, right? It's very obvious that the things that have been done don't work, right? Um, but what does work um, is the advice that we get from our young people, right? And what we've learned and what we're hearing is that incarceration is not the move. Incarceration does not work for young people, and there's a high probability it doesn't work for anybody, right? But what does work is keeping kids in their homes, in their most resource-heavy environments, keeping them in their communities, and wrapping them with services. There is no need to further traumatize a young person who there's a very high likelihood that they've already been very traumatized in their own childhood. So we need to keep kids in their homes. We need to wrap them in services, and we need to avoid further traumatizing our young people.
And Nick, you touched on this a little bit, but why do you think that youth need to be in the discussions around how to really build the alternative to incarceration? If we know that incarceration is harmful, then the question is, what do we build instead of incarceration? What's the approach that is going to allow youth to be in their homes, in their communities? And why do you think young people need to be part of those discussions and leading them?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. I think that there's this concept, or there's this idea that when people are developing a program or developing curriculum or doing whatever, some policy, right? They have a board, they'll invite like 2 youth to come sit on the board. And they'll be like, all right, job done, we did it. And that's not the case. Having youth at the table is not an option. It's not something to just pat yourself on the back for. It's a requirement. If you want something to be effective and you want it to work, and I think this is a general rule for all populations, right? You ask the population that is directly affected. They will always give you the best answer. And so I think the things that are going to work, right, are very similar to the things that that Brandi was talking about with folks in the foster care system. We need stronger families. We need to support young people and their families, and support the social emotional learning of our young people. We need counseling for our traumatized youth, and we need more programs. We need more caring adults. Personally, in my life, I got incarcerated for the first time when I was 14 years old. And it wasn't until I met people from the organization I work for now, Fresh Lifelines for Youth, that I was able to stop getting into trouble because I had positive adult role models that, one, had gone to college, 2, were doing positive things for the community, and 3, really cared and believed in me. in turn, the things that I got in trouble for, the being disruptive, the being defiant, that my problems with authority, right? And turn that into leadership qualities, turn me into an advocate and a leader. All these things that a lot of young people can be identified for, right? But are just being lost in the system.
That's so powerful. I'm thinking both about like the standard. If you want your thing to work, then you've got to ask youth. So pretty much not asking youth and not getting them involved in the design is a surefire way to make sure it's not going to work, right? So like that right there is the call and the compelling. And then also just that idea that all of the qualities and behaviors and labels that got put on us while we were in systems are the exact kind of things that parents, people who love you, will say, oh, my child is so feisty, like they're going to be a great advocate. But to systems, it's this child is so feisty, like they are really hard to work with. They are oppositional. They have behavior management problems. And so this is why systems can't provide many of the things. It has to be in relationship, and it has to be with adults who love that. Those are really powerful statements. And Nick, people here don't know you, and so they don't know where you are now. So can you, one, share a little bit about what your path has been through college and where you are currently and where you're hoping to go? There may be connections on here for you. And then also, can you leave folks with a couple words of advice around what they can go back to their own community and implement in terms of strategies to get youth involved in reform?
Yeah. So yeah, I never planned on going to college. It wasn't in the cards for me. And I ended up doing AmeriCorps National Civilian Community Corps out of high school, where I did wildland firefighting and built some houses, things like that. I was an EMT for a little bit, and then I ended up running into an old principal of mine at my Corn Community School, and she referred me to this program, Project Change, which is a community college program that allows formerly incarcerated students to go to college for free. So I took the opportunity, and I absolutely fell in love with like all the resources that I could get in college. I immediately started working for the school and started working as a student ambassador and going back to the same schools that I went to. So I was in the juvenile hall, I was in the Corn Community School, I was in the regular high school that I eventually graduated from, trying to get folks to come to college. Really just like preaching about higher education. I was able to study abroad through scholarships and things like that, and able to leave the country for the first time, something that will probably not happen for another decade now because of COVID, right? And I got really involved in the formerly incarcerated student network and got really involved in statewide advocacy and in ensuring that young people that are incarcerated have access to education. So I've advocated for a few bills and things like that that will allow young folks to have access to like computers and the internet to access higher education. And I was a mentor for a little bit in the juvenile hall where the program that I was a part of, we offered community college courses in the juvenile hall. And I would go in and just basically take the class with them. And I eventually transferred to UCLA. I'm currently there right now. I live in Sacramento though. Everything's remote, and I'll actually be graduating in the spring. I'm looking to either go to school for public policy, potentially law school. I'm trying to figure that out right now. But whatever it is, I will continue doing the work that I'm doing now. I think my advice for anyone that wants to get youth engaged in advocacy, or just youth engaged in general, right? Identify those traits that they have that make them leaders, right? That make them powerful. We all have our hidden talents, you know. Mine was apparently I was a good advocate. I didn't know that. You know, I was talking to my friend about his little cousin. He gave his cousin like his camera to use, and then found out he has a skill in photography, right? There are young people out there that just have skills and have talents that just need to be unlocked. So do that and ask young people what they need. Young people know. If you ask them what they need to be successful, they can probably tell you. And if that one is too shy to tell you, get a group of folks on, right? Start a focus group. Someone will talk, all right? Someone will tell you what you need to know. So ask youth, identify those key traits, and don't stop trying. Be persistent.
Excellent advice. I'm thinking in my head some kind of slogan like the journey of 1,000 system reforms starts with a single conversation, which is what I think both Brandi and Nick are saying. And it's true. It doesn't need to be a huge developed program, advisory board, you know, building tables or making space at tables. It can literally be a commitment that in every setting that you are in, where you have the opportunity to interact with young people, that you are asking those questions about what they need and what they think should be changed. And if you're not in settings where you're interacting with those young people, then you need to make sure to put yourself regularly in them and seek them out. So thank you both for the advice and guidance that you're providing to everyone. And Michael, I don't know, do you want to take a couple questions? Maybe one question?
Yeah, that would be great. I'm seeing a question from Yvonne here. Yvonne says, how important is it to have people who are of the same racial and ethnic background at the table, or as foster parents or mentors? You know, obviously when we think about both the child welfare system and the juvenile justice system, we know that youth and families of color in particular are overrepresented practically at every stage of the systems. How do you think about this dimension of you know, focusing on diversity and making sure that the individuals that we're serving are at the table, as well as the idea that system staff and partners really reflect the communities that they're serving? So any thoughts on this question about, you know, how important it is race and ethnic background at the table when we're having these conversations?
So for me, I think that's one of the biggest parts. The reason that Fresh Lifelines for Youth was so attractive to me, or so so different to me, was it was Black and brown men that were coming into my class that had gone to college and were doing good things for the community, and that was something I hadn't seen prior, right? And that exposure was the first time that I was like, oh, I can do this too, right? And I think that it helps with communication as well. I when talking to young people right now about, you know, like police in schools, right? A, a conversation that is constantly happening is that young people identify this police officer in their school as the only person that they feel comfortable talking to, because he's Latino, he's Black, and so they can personally identify with him and they can have conversations with him. That is not okay because it should be a counselor instead, right? Personally, I don't want to cry to somebody with a gun, but it's so important, and it can be used in the wrong direction as well.
Thanks, Nick, for sharing those thoughts. And I want to jump to another question from Virginia, who notes that when it comes to young people in detention, sometimes in those programs, young people have to, quote unquote, earn the privilege of phone calls to their parents. And in fact, we know that there's research indicating a correlation between family visitation, family communication, and advancement in education, advancement in, you know, the types of safety within those programs. And so I want to just kind of spin off this question a little bit to ask you about the perceptions of young people and families and whether that might drive some of these policies that we see. You know, at the core of what you're describing is the importance of looking at young people and families and treating them for the incredible individuals that they are, the incredible assets that they have. Yet we know that for many systems, practitioners and partners may not have that perspective. They may look at young people and families in a more deficit-based view. What are your thoughts about ways to change that paradigm, to change, you know, thinking or perspectives that's more strength-based in nature, that acknowledges the incredible strengths that young people and families have?
I want to respond first. And I'm guessing both Brandi and Nick have other thoughts, but on Virginia's specific question, I think you can come at this from two different ways. You can come at it either through the science of adolescent development, which is crystal clear that actually connections and relationships are the intervention that is going to help habilitate young people, or you can come at it from listening to young people who will tell you the same thing. They don't have the science and the randomized controlled studies to prove it, but that's okay because science has all of that. So any kind of policies that we have that are limiting connection, limiting relationships, it is urgent that we dismantle those policies. We have other work at the Youth Law Center that is all about ensuring that incarcerated youth, particularly teen fathers, get to visit with their children regularly and that we invest in their parenting. That they are provided, detention facilities are providing them support to parent and to learn how to do the things like playing lap games and to celebrate their child and praise their child that certainly are not part of a compliance mindset. And they're not typically the things that people think about in parenting. But for all of us who have grown up in systems, there's nothing that we want more than to know how to do a good job with our children. And that's the one thing we were never taught, modeled, shown by the way the system treated us. So in many of the facilities where we've done work, those visits have been looked at as a privilege, which is just flies in the face of all of the science that we know around really how to keep young people connected. So any place where there are limitations on phone calls, limitations on visits, is doing the exact opposite of really what we know is going to help build the strength and the resiliency. And that's important for everyone to hear is folks talk about resilient young people. You don't come out resilient. People build resilience in other people through their practices, through their actions. And you can also dismantle resilience as well. You can break down the sort of inherent resilience that young people come through practices like this, like making young people earn their right to a connection with the people who love them.
I totally agree, Jennifer. And I think one of the things, Nick, that you said that I thought was really powerful is that look for the characteristics that demonstrate power in young people because they're there. You don't have to build them. You don't have to create them. They are there. Young people are inherently powerful and wise and insightful. And so I think that if system folk, I'll just use that term, can really approach every young person and see what they already have versus even saying, oh, well, you have so much potential. You have so much power. Right. And the potential comes when we work together to figure out how you want to use your power in a way that will set you up for what you see as success for your life and the impact that you want to have in the world, you know, according to you. And so I think back to my own experience when, you know, I have people say, well, Brandi, gosh, I can't imagine how you moved from home to home and how you were institutionalized and all these things happened to you because look how wonderful you are. And for whatever reason, people couldn't see that when I was 15, breaking out windows, fighting staff in the group home, but it was there, right? So I'm not a different human being than I was then. Like I've had different relationships and I've had people invest in me differently. I've had people provide opportunities that are different, but inherently, I am the same person today that I was 25 years ago when no one would touch me with a 10-foot pole. And if people had approached me as though I know there's something in there, let me take the time to find it versus, ooh, what I see is not for me. And so I'm going to shut this young person down. I'm going to incarcerate them. I'm going to push them to the side. I'm going to put them in a locked facility. They're dangerous. That to me is the work. It's us taking a step back and saying, even though this doesn't look like what I'm used to, even though this doesn't make me comfortable, even though this isn't my vision of what success looks like for young people, let me be intentional about seeing your power today and understanding that it's already there.
It's such a powerful thought there, Brandi. And I think that we have addressed this question from Esther Diggs in a certain respect here in terms of practices that we should be avoiding because they don't support in this investment in youth power. And I think Jennifer and Brandi both have spoken to the need for supporting those positive relationships. And if you've got policies and practices that interfere with that, then you're it's really counter to what we're trying to achieve. Nick, do you have, I know that we've just got a couple of minutes left here, but any other thoughts on practices that we should really not be advancing because they're counter to what we're talking about here in terms of true partnership and true empowerment of young people and families?
Please stop incarcerating kids. I think that's my big one. We need to keep kids in homes. We need to keep kids in communities because what Jennifer and what Brandi are touching on, right, is that relationships are the key, right? So placing a youth in a locked facility and severing their positive relationships, you're not rehabilitating a young person. Provide them more positive relationships. That's what adds those resiliency factors. Don't traumatize a kid by throwing them in a box, please.
Thanks so much. This has been such a powerful session. Jennifer, let me turn to you for some closing remarks here. And then I'd like to, if you could pass the baton back to me for some announcements that we've got regarding the Gen Reno Forum, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like the most powerful closing remark was what Nick just said, which is we have a long way to go in both foster care and juvenile justice before we are headed in that direction. I think Brandi said, anything, we need to be evaluating every single policy and practice in terms of what does it foster and support youth's relationships or connections, or does it interfere with them? And that's the direction that youth have told us to go in. That's the work that we have to do in the system. That's going to require the leadership and the commitment of everyone who's on the call today. But luckily, I think Brandi and Nick have given you very practical next steps, which is to get off this webcast and go talk to some young people that you're working with and get their ideas about how we can make that actionable and real. I want to thank you for giving us this forum to share this information with people and to engage in this discussion. I think these are really important discussions to have both here, but also everywhere around how we can do really a better job at ensuring that when a system has to intervene in the life of a young person, that we actually make that a positive intervention rather than an intervention that causes more trauma and more harm to children. And we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Let me, on behalf of everyone, thank Brandi and Nick for your insight, for your time with us today. I know and I can tell from the chat that our participants got so much out of your remarks, and thank you for all that you do. And Nick, just keep in mind, if you're looking for a public policy school, keep in mind Georgetown here at McCourt. We've got a wonderful school, and we would love to have you over here. Jennifer, to you, thank you so much for your leadership. I think everybody can see why you are this year's recipient of the Janet Reno Women's Leadership Award. Your leadership, your vision, your realness, the fact that your values come crystal clear through your work and through your words and through your actions really says it all. And we're just so honored to be connected with you in this way. And congratulations once again. I want to thank all of our staff at the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform who worked behind the scenes to support the Janet Reno Endowment, but also on this webinar today, a special shout out to Cjjr Program Manager Hannah Opperman, who serves as our lead on the Janet Reno Endowment and is working feverishly behind the scenes to make sure that all of this happens. So Hannah, thank you so much for all that you do. Folks, stay tuned. We will follow up with a recording of this webinar for those folks who were not able to join us. So we will be disseminating that. And as I mentioned, we're delighted to announce that we will be hosting next year's Janet Reno Forum, which Dean Ken-Chan covered earlier in a virtual format. So we will be providing more details soon, but we're gearing up for a fantastic multi-day virtual event featuring inspirational speakers who will focus on the importance of cross-system efforts to improve outcomes for kids, for families, and communities. Among other things, this will be a great opportunity to celebrate our anniversary, technically our 11th year anniversary of the crossover youth practice model, which is being demonstrated to improve outcomes for kids all across the United States. Please know that the dates for this virtual event are July 26th through the 29th, 2021. I'll say that again, July 26th through the 29th, 2021. We hope that as many of you as possible will join us for that event. And we will be disseminating more information, including the registration link in the weeks to come. So please stay tuned. And if you're not a member of our Cjjr listserv, please be sure to go on our website and sign up today. Thanks again for all of you all, the participants, for being with us for a wonderful discussion. On behalf of Cjjr, we wish you a wonderful end of the year. Take care and be well.